cameras were already rolling when the storm broke. Under the blinding lights of the studio, Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her voice rising. Sharp and jagged like broken glass, her finger jabbed the air, slicing across the set as if each point could puncture her opponent into silence. The host tried to steady the flow, but Kellyanne's voice drowned everything else. The panel's chatter vanished under her fury. "People like you are destroying this country," she thundered, her face tight with indignation. Every syllable ricocheted off the walls, echoing like a courtroom gavel slammed in anger. The tension was so thick it seemed even the cameras might crack under the weight of her rage. The audience sat stunned, breaths caught in their throats. Some clutched their phones, already recording, their screens glowing as they captured history in real time. The sound of Kellyanne's voice was relentless, as if volume alone could substitute for truth. The more she shouted, the more the air in the room seemed to tremble. Across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, still as stone. Her hands rested lightly in front of her, her eyes locked, unwavering, on the storm unleashed before her. Not a flicker of fear, not a trace of panic crossed her face. The contrast was cinematic. On one side, a political veteran unraveling in fury. On the other, a freshman congresswoman composed in silence, waiting, breathing, watching. Kellyanne's voice cracked. For a split second, a shrill edge breaking through as she hurled her final words with the force of a hammer blow. "You don't belong in this conversation. You don't belong at this table." Gasps rippled across the studio. The host froze, eyes darting from Conway's reddened face to Crockett's steady calm. A producer waved frantically off camera, signaling to cut. But it was too late. The moment had already burned itself into the memory of everyone watching. And then, for the first time in the entire tirade, silence. The studio felt suspended in air, as if the very oxygen was waiting to hear what would come next. Jasmine leaned forward, her lips parting, her voice calm and deliberate. But as her tirade hit its peak, Osmond's calm reply would flip the script hand. The internet would never forget it. The debate had not been scheduled as a clash of personalities, but that is what it became. On paper, it was billed as another roundtable-and exchange of perspectives during a heated election cycle, when every word carried the weight of millions of votes. The network promoted it as a chance for Americans to hear from voices on opposite ends of the spectrum. What the producers hadn't anticipated was how quickly the atmosphere would transform into a high-voltage confrontation. Kellyanne Conway was no stranger to the spotlight. She had long mastered the art of turning questions into attacks, of transforming a discussion into a verbal battlefield. To her supporters, she was fierce, unyielding, the queen of spin. To her critics, she embodied everything wrong with political discourse, loud, relentless, skilled at dodging truth by overwhelming the conversation with sheer force. For years, she thrived in this environment, intimidating opponents into submission by sheer speed and aggression. But opposite her sat Jasmine Crockett, a woman carved from a different stone. Though newer to the national stage, she had already made waves in Congress with her sharp interrogations, her ability to stay cool under pressure, and her willingness to speak uncomfortable truths. Unlike Conway, Crockett didn't rely on volume. She relied on precision. Where Conway scattered sparks, Crockett struck with the accuracy of a scalpel. For many viewers, this was the first time they would see her in direct combat with one of the most combative figures in American politics. The timing made everything heavier. With the nation divided and every headline dissected in real time, the stakes of this debate stretched beyond the studio walls. Millions were tuned in, scrolling live reactions, posting clips within seconds. Every smirk, every interruption, every soundbite had the potential to become tomorrow's viral moment. Conway thrived on this terrain. She had survived countless rounds of hostile interviews and spun them into headlines favorable to her cause. But Crockett was something different. She didn't flinch. She didn't play to the noise. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had been underestimated all her life and had grown stronger because of it. The collision felt destined. Conway, the veteran brawler who never hesitated to raise her voice, versus Crockett, the newcomer whose calm carried an almost disarming power. One thrived in chaos, the other in composure. To see them seated across from each other was like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon in inevitability. Confrontation no producer could have scripted better. As the cameras captured every twitch, every breath, the tension in the studio thickened. It was no longer a debate about policy or strategy. It had become a referendum on character, a test of whether bluster could overpower calm, whether shouting could defeat truth spoken. Softly, the audience could feel it. So could the millions online. This was not going to be forgotten, and though Kellyanne Conway screamed with the confidence of someone who had never been bested in front of a live camera, she had no idea the ground was shifting beneath her feet. No one knew this night would become a turning point in their careers. Long before the night she squared off against Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne Conway had built a reputation that preceded her. To some, she was a pioneer woman who had carved her way into the inner circle of one of the most unpredictable presidencies in American history. To others, she was the emblem of everything corrosive about modern politics: relentless, shameless, and unafraid to twist words until their meanings snapped in half. Her rise came during the turbulent campaign of 2016, when she became the first woman to manage a successful presidential run. Overnight, Kellyanne transformed from a respected pollster into a household name. But it wasn't data or strategy that etched her into the public consciousness. It was her presence on television. She became the White House's fiercest defender, facing down anchors with a grin that never faltered and a barrage of talking points that seemed rehearsed to exhaustion. Her style was unmistakable. When pressed with a tough question, she would deflect, redirect, or overwhelm the interviewer with a torrent of words. Critics dubbed it verbal overkill, a tactic where volume and speed replaced substance. Fact-checkers groaned as she coined phrases like alternative facts, an expression that crystallized her brand, unapologetically combative, willing to redefine reality itself if it suited the agenda. Viewers quickly learned that interviews with Kellyanne were not conversations, they were battlegrounds. Journalists who tried to corner her with logic often found themselves drowned in a sea of rhetorical sidesteps. She wielded deflection like a weapon, lashing out at opponents with sharp pivots, accusations, and a tone that carried the weight of absolute certainty. Even when her statements were disproven, she rarely showed doubt. Arrogance wasn't a flaw in her delivery, it was the fuel that kept her on air. Clips of her clashes filled cable news montages. In one infamous moment, she brushed off uncomfortable questions about White House ethics violations by attacking the bias of the interviewer. In another, she shouted down an anchor, turning the segment into a spectacle that left viewers either cheering her audacity or shaking their heads in disbelief. Her appearances weren't designed to inform, they were designed to dominate. For years, that strategy worked. Kellyanne thrived in chaos. The louder the environment, the more combative the exchange, the more she shined. Unlike other surrogates who wilted under pressure, she seemed energized by confrontation, feeding off the tension like it was oxygen. For her base, she was a warrior unapologetic, fearless, always ready with a counterpunch. For her critics, she was a storm, leaving behind confusion and exhaustion in her wake. And yet, woven into her performances was a consistent thread: arrogance. She carried herself as though she had already won before the debate began. Dismissing her opponents with smirks, eye rolls, and interruptions, she wielded mockery as easily as statistics, often belittling those across the table with a tone that implied superiority rather than persuasion. Many tried to push back against her force. Few succeeded. That confidence, that unflinching bravado, was precisely what set the stage for her downfall. Because arrogance unchecked becomes a blind spot. Kellyanne had faced off against seasoned anchors, polished politicians, and aggressive critics, and she had weathered them all. But Jasmine Crockett was different. Crockett wasn't chasing viral fireworks or looking to shout louder than her opponent. She thrived in the silence, in the space between words, in the calm that turned fury into farce. The irony was almost poetic. Kellyanne had spent years perfecting her strategy of verbal dominance, raising her voice until it swallowed reason whole, weaponizing deflection until the truth seemed unreachable. She had built an empire of sound bites and spectacle, a fortress of noise. But what she didn't realize was that noise can be pierced, not by more chaos, but by stillness. And on that night, in that studio, seated across from Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne Conway would discover a truth she had spent her entire career avoiding. The very strategy that had carried her into the spotlight, that had made her the queen of spin, was about to crumble in front of millions of viewers. But on this night, that strategy would backfire spectacularly. Before the lights of the television studio and the millions of eyes watching online, Jasmine Crockett had walked a path paved with grit, struggle, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Her rise was not the product of privilege or political dynasty, but of persistence and principle. A lawyer by trade, she had cut her teeth in the courtroom, standing up for clients who often had no one else to defend them. For Jasmine, justice was not an abstract concept, it was lived reality, shaped by the faces of the people she fought for every single day. In her earliest cases, she confronted systemic inequities head-on. She represented the voiceless, the marginalized, the overlooked. Long before the cameras sought her out, she was the steady presence beside those society often tried to forget. The courtroom taught her what no textbook could, that dignity mattered. Most when it was denied, that power could be wielded against the powerless unless someone dared to push back. These battles molded her into a fighter, not one who relied on theatrics or shouting, but on clarity, composure, and truth. That same steadiness carried into Congress when she won her seat. On Capitol Hill, Crockett quickly gained attention, not by courting headlines or chasing controversy, but by the precision of her words. Her questioning style became a quiet legend, sharp, methodical, devastating. She didn't need to raise her voice to leave witnesses rattled, dead. She let silence work in her favor, allowing the weight of her questions to linger until there was nowhere left to hide. Colleagues, staffers, and viewers alike recognized that this was her gift, the ability to command the room not by force, but by presence. And yet, behind the sharpness, lay authenticity. Jasmine spoke plainly about where she came from, about the struggles that had shaped her. She wore her identity unapologetically, not as a shield, but as a source of pride. For constituents who longed for representation that looked like them, lived like them, and fought like them, she became a beacon. She did not soften her edges to appease critics, nor did she mask her convictions to fit neatly into the mold of politics as usual. She was herself direct, unflinching, real. Her values were not borrowed from consultants or polling data. They were rooted in community, in the lived experiences of those she had served. Every speech, every committee, hearing, every debate traced back to those roots. For Jasmine, politics was not a performance. It was an extension of the work she had always done, standing in the gap for those who deserved more than they were given. That authenticity resonated deeply. To her supporters, she wasn't just a politician. She was proof that voices like theirs could rise, could matter, could lead. It was this authenticity that made her clash with Kellyanne Conway so electrifying. Conway represented a brand of politics built on performance, on spin, on the loudest voice in the room. Crockett represented something else entirely, a new vision of leadership rooted in substance over noise. Calm over chaos, dignity over arrogance. Their collision was never just about two individuals. It was about two ways of approaching power. Her journey had prepared her for this. Years of standing firm in the courtroom had given her the resilience to face down manufactured outrage. Years of listening to the unheard had given her the perspective to see beyond the bluster of an opponent. Years of being underestimated as a black woman, as a newcomer, as someone unwilling to play by the rules of spin had, forged her into someone who thrived precisely when the odds were stacked. In the days leading up to the debate, Jasmine had not spent hours rehearsing zingers or plotting how to rattle her opponent. That was never her style. She prepared by grounding herself in the same way she always had, by remembering who she represented. why she was there, and what was at stake. To her, this was not about a television clip or a viral soundbite. It was about truth and the dignity of delivering it in a world too often drowned out by noise. That is what made her presence across from Kellyanne Conway so magnetic. Even as Conway's voice rose, even as she jabbed her finger and filled the room with fury, Jasmine's calm was unshaken. She had weathered storms before. She knew the power of silence, of composure, of refusing to meet chaos with chaos, where others might have cracked under the pressure. Jasmine leaned into the strength she had cultivated her entire career in that studio. Under those lights, she became the embodiment of a different kind of power, the kind that does not scream, to be heard but speaks so clearly that the world cannot help but listen. And though she hadn't set out to deliver a viral moment, destiny had a way of rewarding authenticity, because when the shouting finally stopped and the silence fell heavy in the room, Jasmine Crockett was ready. With one calm, deliberate reply, she would etch herself into the national conversation, and soon her words would not just counter an opponent, they would travel across the internet, echoing as a viral mic drop heard around the nation. The moment. The opening insults left Caroline Leavitt's lips. The tone of the debate shifted into something far more volatile than the producers had planned. What was intended as a spirited exchange of ideas began unraveling into a verbal slugfest. With Leavitt swinging wild and heavy, determined to overwhelm her opponent through sheer force of volume, she doubled down, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "You don't even deserve this platform," she snapped, the words sharp enough to draw audible gasps from the crowd. The studio murmured, a low rumble of discomfort rippling across the audience as her attacks grew harsher. Some sat in stunned silence, others shook their heads, while a handful clapped nervously, unsure whether they were applauding conviction or chaos. The moderators tried to step in, urging her to yield the floor, but Leavitt pressed forward, her words tumbling faster, louder, as though she could bury truth beneath noise. She leaned forward, her gestures wide and cutting, her face flushed with the confidence of someone who believed the sheer force of her fury would carry the night. "This isn't your America," she declared, her voice cracking at the peak of her anger. All the while, Kash Patel sat in measured silence, his posture relaxed, his eyes steady on her. He did not interrupt, he did not roll his eyes or mock her tone. Instead, he let the storm rage on, his calm presence growing more striking with every passing second. Where Leavitt's energy scattered like sparks, Patel's composure settled like bedrock. The contrast was unmistakable, one figure unraveling in noise, the other embodying strength and stillness. The cameras captured every detail. Viewers at home saw Leavitt's voice climbing into shrill territory, her arguments less coherent, her body language betraying desperation. Side by side on the split screen, Patel's restraint grew more powerful simply by comparison. He looked less like a man under attack and more like a man waiting for the exact moment when silence would weigh heavier than shouting. The murmurs from the audience grew louder now, shifting tone. What began as gasps of surprise became whispers of disbelief. People glanced at each other, some stifling laughter, others shaking their heads at the spectacle. The balance in the room was tilting. Leavitt had wanted dominance, but the harder she pushed, the more the spectacle began to reflect poorly on her. Her arrogance, once masked as confidence, was unraveling under the bright lights. And then a moment of silence fell, not because Leavitt had chosen to pause, but because her words had begun to stumble. Her rhythm broke, her voice faltered for a fraction of a second, and the audience leaned in, waiting. Patel saw it. The opening. A pause. That could shift the night. Slowly, he adjusted his microphone, his hands steady, his eyes locked forward. He leaned in not with urgency, but with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew the weight of his words would matter more than all the shouting that came before. And then he leaned into the mic. The studio had been roaring with Caroline Leavitt's fury, a wave of noise battering against reason. But in the space of that pause, the fraction of a second, when her voice broke and the silence wrapped itself around the room, the atmosphere shifted. All eyes turned, Not to the woman who had spent the last 5 minutes shouting herself hoarse, but to the man who had not raised his voice once. Kash Patel leaned into the mic. No rush, no stumble, just deliberate, unshakable calm. He exhaled softly, and when he spoke, his tone was almost gentle, so quiet at first that the audience leaned forward in their chairs to catch every syllable. "Caroline," he began, his voice steady as granite, "you can scream all you want about who belongs and who doesn't. But let me tell you something. My family has given more to this country than your shouting ever could." The words landed like a hammer cloaked in velvet. The contrast was devastating, where Levitt had flailed. With rage, Patel's delivery was slow, deliberate, cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. The crowd reacted instantly. A low murmur swept across the studio, the kind that follows an unexpected blow. The moderators glanced at each other, eyebrows raised, sensing that a shift far larger than debate theatrics had just occurred. Patel paused, tensionally. He let the silence sit. He let it expand, so the weight of his words could sink in. Then he continued, his voice unwavering. "My father came here with nothing. He worked every day, 7 days a week, because he believed in America not as some. Slogan to weaponize, but as a promise. A promise that people from anywhere could build a life here if they were willing to work for it." Levitt's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth as if to interrupt, but the energy had drained from her. Fury? The audience wasn't with her anymore. They were listening to him. Patel pressed forward, still calm, still in control. "So when you tell me to go back, what you're really saying is that people like me, families like mine, should never have believed in this country. And Caroline, that's not just an insult to MITS, an insult to America itself." Gasps erupted. Smattering of applause broke out, cautious at first, then swelling. The camera caught Levitt shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier confidence dissolving into visible frustration. She had built her persona on volume, but now volume was useless. Dunned. Against dignity, her weapons looked like toys. Patel leaned back slightly, his composure intact, as if to say, "I don't need to shout. The truth speaks loudly enough." The moderator tried to regain control, fumbling with their notes, but it was too late. The debate had found its defining moment, and the audience knew it. Patel wasn't done. His voice carried not just to Levitt, but to everyone watching at home. "You see, my story isn't unique. Millions of families came here just like mine. Families that built businesses, served in our military, sent their kids to school, paid their taxes, believed in the dream that America sold to the world. That is what this country is. That is who we are. And the more you try to deny that, the more you reveal your own fear of it." The applause was louder now. This wasn't just a response. It was a dismantling. He wasn't arguing with Levitt anymore. He was speaking to the room, to the viewers, to the nation. Levitt tried once more to interject, waving her hand, raising her voice again, but the timing was wrong. The room wasn't with her. Her words sounded hollow, desperate, almost drowned out by the lingering resonance of Patel's reply. And then came the dagger. Delivered with the same calm, unflinching clarity as before. "You wanted me to feel small tonight, but all you've done is remind people why America is bigger than hate. You tried to silence me with noise, but it turns out silence makes your noise irrelevant." The studio exploded. Applause thundered. People rose from their seats, and even the moderators couldn't hide their stunned expressions. One leaned back, lips parted in disbelief, while another gave the faintest nod. As though acknowledging they had just witnessed something unforgettable, Levitt sat frozen. For the first time all night, she didn't have a line. Her weapon, the endless barrage of insults, had failed her. The contrast could not have been sharper. Patel composed, dignified, delivering every word like it had been etched in stone. Levitt flustered, cornered by her own aggression. The moment lingered. Cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, calm, assured, unflinching. Then cut to Levitt, blinking rapidly, fumbling for words that would not come. On social media, the moment was already spreading. Clips of Patel's line, "Silence makes your noise irrelevant," were clipped, captioned, shared. But inside the studio, No one yet knew just how seismic the reaction would become. Patel closed his statement with the same composure he had carried from the start. "This is my country. No amount of shouting will ever change that." It was over. The battle had reached its peak, and the victor was clear. Patel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Simply let the applause wash over the stage, embodying the quiet strength of a man who knew he had just spoken not only for himself, but for millions. And in that silence, the silence after the storm Caroline, Levitt's strategy collapsed. She'd built her entire performance on volume. Patel had dismantled it with stillness. The cameras captured her defeat in real time. The darting eyes, the tightened jaw, the forced smile that couldn't mask, the humiliation. Viewers at home saw it. The studio audience felt it. And Patel sat steady, unmoved, letting the truth echo louder than any insult ever could. The moderators finally called for a break, their voices trembling slightly, trying to steer the program back to neutral ground. But the energy in the room was uncontainable. Something irreversible had happened. A moment had been born. As the lights dimmed and the studio transitioned into commercials, whispers filled the air. Commentators backstage were already drafting headlines. Journalists on Twitter were typing furiously. Viewers at home were clipping, captioning, sharing, because what had just unfolded was not merely a debate exchange. It was a cultural earthquake, and yet no one in the room, not even Patel himself, could have predicted the scale of what was coming next. Because while his words had shaken the studio to its core, but what happened online would be even bigger. The studio lights dimmed, but the real show had only just begun. By the time the credits rolled and the cameras powered down, the moment had already escaped into the wilds of social media.
Within
minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm counterpunch was everywhere edited, captioned, replayed in loops that seemed endless. On TikTok, the soundbite, "Silence makes your noise irrelevant," was already climbing. Teenagers were lip-syncing it. Creators were using it in reaction videos. And political accounts layered it over dramatic music. The hashtag Crockett.com surged to the top of the trending list, joined swiftly by hashtag Kellyanne MELTS DOWN. The pairing told the story without needing explanation. One word symbolizing composure. The other humiliation. Twitter exploded in real time. Verified accounts, journalists, late-night comedians, and activists lit up the timeline. One tweet read, "Kellyanne screamed for 5 minutes straight. Jasmine ended it in 5 seconds." Another, more cutting, said simply, "Volume doesn't equal victory." Tonight proved that. The quote was paired with a freeze frame of Crockett leaning slightly toward the mic, serene and unshaken. On YouTube Shorts, the confrontation was edited into slow-motion montages, complete with dramatic orchestral music. Memes flooded Instagram, split screens of Crockett's stillness beside roaring lions, or captions like, "When she goes high pitch, you go high road." Kellyanne became the day's punchline, her contorted expression mid-scream plastered over joke after joke. One particularly viral meme showed her with a caption that read, "Wi-Fi signal when you need it most." Below, Crockett's calm stare bore the words, "Ethernet." But the conversation wasn't limited to comedy. Commentators across the spectrum weighed in. Progressive voices hailed Crockett as a model of dignity under fire. One op-ed headline: "Read The Power of Stillness. Crockett redefines political debate." Meanwhile, conservative pundits scrambled to reframe the exchange. Some insisting Kellyanne had been passionate, others avoiding the clip altogether. The split only amplified the story's reach. Everyone had to weigh in, and silence was its own admission. Celebrities added fuel to the blaze. Actors, musicians, and athletes tweeted praise for Crockett's poise. A Grammy-winning singer posted, "That's how you handle hate.com, clear crushing." A basketball star shared the video on Instagram with the caption, "This is how you shut down trash talk." Even rivals in politics, some who had sparred with Crockett in the past, acknowledged her mastery of the moment. One senator quipped, "Note to self, never debate Jasmine Crockett unless you're ready to lose on camera." The cultural echo chamber magnified it further. Late-night comedy shows replayed the clip with gleeful commentary. Talk radio stations spent entire segments dissecting Kellyanne's unraveling. Podcasts analyzed the rhetorical strategies, pointing to Crockett's control of timing, tone, and narrative. Professors even began using the clip as an example in communication classes, how composure could dismantle chaos. More effectively than any volume of shouting, for Kellyanne the fallout was brutal. Memes mocked her with ruthless precision. Headlines described her as unhinged, melting down, losing control. Conservative allies distanced themselves, downplaying the moment or avoiding questions about it entirely. The louder she had screamed in the studio, the louder her silence felt afterward. For Crockett, it was the opposite. Her follower count skyrocketed overnight. Campaign donations spiked as small-dollar contributions poured in from viewers who felt they had seen not just a debate, but a declaration of values. People sent messages saying she represented the dignity they craved in leadership. A campaign lead like Jasmine began to circulate, with teachers, activists, and even parents using the phrase to describe holding calm strength in their own lives. The viral clip transcended politics. It became a cultural metaphor. Editorial cartoons showed Crockett standing firm as a hurricane swirled around her. Editorial writers framed the moment as more than a debate, it was America itself, confronted with noise and choosing calm instead. But perhaps the most telling reaction came not from politicians or celebrities, but from everyday viewers. On Facebook, comments poured in, immigrants sharing their own stories of resilience, veterans saying they felt seen, parents telling their kids to watch this as a lesson in strength. One comment summed it up perfectly. Tonight, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She gave America its reflection back, and it looked dignified. And yet, as viral as the moment had already become, no one realized how much bigger it was going to get. The internet had claimed it, memes had multiplied, voices had amplified, but the ripple effect was only beginning, because this wasn't just about a clip or a trending hashtag. This was about a turning point in the national conversation. And the question hanging over America was clear. Could one calm reply redefine how the country thinks about power? In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett faced a choice. She could let the moment remain just a viral clip, a fleeting burst of online fame destined to be replaced by the next outrage. Or she could reframe it, turn the heat of that televised clash into light, something larger than herself. And she chose the latter. Standing before a town hall crowd days later, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't replay the clip or revel in the headlines. Instead, she shifted the spotlight outward. That night wasn't about me versus Kellyanne Conway, she told the audience, her voice firm yet warm. It was about all of us, about the kind of country we want to be. Do we reward the loudest voice in the room, more the voice that carries the truth, calmly and clearly? The room erupted. In applause, not for a viral moment, but for the principle she had distilled from it. Crockett's words transformed the clash into a parable, lesson in what leadership could look like when stripped of theatrics. She went further, invoking the deeper values at stake. Democracy isn't about who can shout the loudest, she continued. Democracy is about listening, about reasoning, about treating each other with enough dignity to let the truth speak for itself. And that night, what you saw was not just a debate, it was a reminder that composure is not weakness. Composure is strength. The line landed with force. Parents nodded, children leaned closer, and the press scribbled furiously in their notebooks. For so long, American politics had seemed like a contest of insults, a theater of rage. Crockett was suggesting another way, a way that felt both radical and deeply traditional, tied to the values of patience, integrity, and resilience that many believed had been lost in the noise. Social media amplified this message just as powerfully as it had amplified the confrontation itself. Hashtags shifted from #Crockett.com to #leadership by example. Educators shared clips of her speech saying it was a lesson for their students. Pastors echoed her refrain in Sunday sermons. Sometimes the loudest person loses, and the calmest voice wins. It was no longer about Kellyanne Conway's meltdown. It was about something timeless, the idea that strength doesn't come from rage, but from resolve. That true power isn't in the volume of your words, but in the weight of your truth. Crockett herself put it best when she said, "The internet might remember that one clip forever, but what I hope you carry from it is this. Our democracy needs more than arguments, it needs examples. It needs leaders willing to stay calm when the room gets loud. Leaders who won't trade dignity for a soundbite." In those moments, she wasn't just speaking as a politician. She was speaking as a teacher, a daughter of immigrants, a woman who had fought her way into Congress not by raising her voice, but by sharpening her convictions. The crescendo came as she closed her remarks, her voice steady yet ringing with conviction. America doesn't need more noise. America needs more calm. It needs more people willing to stand their ground with dignity, even when others try to shake it. Because dignity isn't just how you win an argument, it's how you keep a democracy alive. The crowd rose to its feet, thunderous applause, filling the hall. Reporters captured the scene, headlines declaring not just a political victory, but a moral one. In the end, Crockett's message transcended the debate stage. It became a reminder, etched into the national conversation. Sometimes history is not made by the loudest shouter, but by the calmest voice. And in that truth, America found a flicker of hope, proof that leadership could still rise above the noise. It began with a scream. Under the bright glare of studio lights, Kellyanne Conway unleashed her fury, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. For a moment, it seemed the noise might drown everything else. But then came the calm Jasmine Crockett's measured reply, a single moment of composure that shifted the entire balance of the debate. What started as chaos ended as clarity, and that clarity didn't stay in the studio. It erupted across social media, spreading through hashtags, memes, and headlines, until the whole nation was talking. One scream had tried to dominate the night, but it was Crockett's calm that defined it. That's the lesson here. In politics, as in life, the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. Real power lies in dignity, in patience, in knowing when to speak, and how to let truth carry farther than any insult ever could. Crockett's composure wasn't just a win in a debate. It was a reminder to all of us. Noise fades, but dignity echoes. And that's why Freedom Files exists, to cut through the chaos, to reveal the stories beneath the shouting, and to remind you that truth doesn't need volume to be heard. Every day, we dive into the drama, the showdowns, the high-stakes moments that define our democracy, not just to retell them, but to reveal the lessons inside them. So if you believe calm can conquer chaos, if you believe dignity still matters, in a noisy world, then this is your place. Join us and let's keep uncovering the moments that shake politics to its core. Subscribe to Freedom Files for more daily political drama, because the truth isn't just told, it's revealed.